Hello everyone, welcome to the Hiring Room by the Scatalyst. In today's episode, we will be talking about hiring and talent management again. So most organizations believe that talent challenges begin when a position becomes vacant. In reality, talent problems often start years earlier. The organizations that consistently attract, retain, and develop great people aren't necessarily better at hiring. They're better at anticipating future trends, building leadership pipelines, and treating talent as a business asset. In today's episode, we explore why organizations remain reactive despite having more workforce data than ever before in the world of AI, in the world of data, in the world of numbers, and what strategic workforce planning actually looks like. So, Varun Bhatnagar is a talent business partner at HSBC and has previously led talent leadership development, succession planning, workforce planning, and organizational development initiatives across global organizations. His work has shaped talent strategies across multiple regions, industries, and thousands of employees, helping organizations to build leadership pipelines, improve talent outcomes, and future of work challenges. In short, Varun has done everything that we have been reading in books and we have been preparing our leaders to do. So today we will have an insight from a person who has done it all and who has seen it all. Um, Varun, thank you so much again for joining us. Let's start today's discussion and sort of help our listeners and our podcast audience to see talent management through your perspective. I would like to begin today's conversation with something more about your background and sort of help our audience understand what is your perspective on it. So, how about you take us through your journey and tell us what attracted you first to talent management and organizational development.
Right. Thanks for the question. So, I think early on in my career, I realized, that business performance and people performance are inseparable. But of course, those were still big jargons. And early on in our career, when we are in college, we don't really think of all those things. So, something very naturally happened that I was in Jai Hind College in Mumbai, and I was a part of a lot of organizational committees internally with the college. So I was part of the National Entrepreneurship Network, then I was also part of the Commerce Association. So we always had business collaborations going on. While, what we used to do is we used to get in leaders for different topics, and they used to talk about, what's the industry doing, what's happening, what are the new trends. And that is where I started hearing about talent management. So that was something that was new. I had heard of learning development, I had heard of talent acquisition, but talent management was new to me. So I realized that that's where that link of business performance and people performance came in. So organizations often spent a lot of time discussing strategy, products, growth, but they did not really discuss the real differentiator, who's the people, or having the right people at the right time in the right roles. So basically, it was a kind of an opportunity that came in that helped me influence the business outcomes through people, and that is what was a driving factor for me, because I have always been a person who's people oriented, and I've tried to take up positions where I can contribute and help people, and it basically translated into talent management as a role when I got to know about that this is something that I can do by building leaders, and it is not very different from what I'm already doing. And that's how I slowly got into EY as my first job, and slowly started building up by taking up various internal roles within the organization, and that led me to talent management, leadership development, and organization development.
Very interesting. Your path has a very what do we say, eminent importance to your curiosity. But good to know the start as to how you began your journey in talent management. Varun, you've also worked across consulting firm. You mentioned that the first company you started working with was EY. You worked with financial service organizations and global enterprises. How do you think your understanding of talent has developed over decades? Is there any pattern? Is there any progress that you have observed?
So, what has changed, I think, in the last, I would say, 10, 15 odd years is initially, I thought my view was about the talent is only about hiring and development. But today, as business evolves, I look at it as a business capability, right? So the question is not that do we have good people, but do we have the right capabilities required to execute a future strategy? And then you look at the people who are sitting on that chair, which is that role, to say whether the individuals have those capability or not. So I think the biggest shift for me is basically moving from a role-centric mindset to a capability-centric mindset as the future evolves. And that's how the future organizations are also adapting,
Yeah.
based on the current situation.
Okay. And also a lot of times we talk about skill liquidity, where we are training people in a way where even if they're moving across roles, their skill is still intact. So yeah, again, very important trend for us to focus on.
Yes.
If you were to sort of share your lessons, your experiences from your time at EY and also at BCG, um, which some lessons which are still influencing your thinking, what would those lessons be?
I think, to be very honest, consulting is all about strategy, data interpretation, and how do you bring that to life. And consulting taught me three important lessons. So I would say the first one is every people challenge is ultimately a business challenge, right? Uh, Second is data matters, but the insights that you derive from it matters more. So many organizations have plenty of data, but then unable to do actionable or bring out actionable insights through that. And thirdly, I would
Yeah.
say the solutions, the talent solutions must be practical. So, the business frameworks will not be able to adapt until, it's useful to the organization. So as a consulting firm, while we were pitching to our clients, we had to ensure that our solutions are practical and implementable on the ground.
Okay. Okay, interesting. And also the way you talked about human as like something that we cannot ignore it, because at the end of the day, results and performances are coming on table. Work is being done by people, so it's important to pay attention. And you rightly said that people problem is a business problem. Okay. Um, Varun, was there a moment in your career that fundamentally changed how you look at people, performance, or leadership? Because to be very honest, not a lot of leaders are very proactive in terms of putting their people ahead, not just on paper, but like in real work environment.
Well, while I was working and I was building my career in this field, one of the biggest lessons that I came across was when I was having succession discussions and when we were having some talent and succession planning conversations. So I saw organizations lose high performers, and just because they were viewed as they are indispensable in their current role, but they were never given certain opportunities to grow beyond it. Basically, that taught me that leadership is not about extracting performance from people. It's basically looking at what are the lateral career trajectories or pathways for their future growth that we can enable, right? And organizations want to retain talent and invest in their people, but then just not able to look at the larger picture to say, you know, if the organization is looking at what's in it for them, the individual is also looking at what's in it for me, right? While
Yeah.
the aspects of salary, perks, all of that are kept aside, the individual would want to grow in the role. So I think that was a fundamental change that I came across to say, how can one organization be different from the another basis what they do, or what kind of pathways do they build for their people.
Okay. Okay. I think succession planning is something that we will be talking ahead as well, in this another segment. But apart from that, thank you for sharing your insights. And a lot of times, companies, organizations nowadays are saying that um, we are very people centric, not just in terms of customers, but also in terms of our employees. So that brings in that insight home that at the end, if you're not able to manage your workforce, then that is a serious, urgent requirement of you looking at it from a different perspective. Um, so Varun, you also very nicely crafted and nicely shared your journey of joining EY and sort of understanding talent management from a word to the process. Could you also help us to understand if people were to start their journey in talent management, if people were to begin their journey in talent management, how would they look at it as like a function of job? What do they need to do? How do they need to do? And what is there for them to sort of explore?
So, anyone who's, starting up, I would strongly recommend, when you're in college, experiment, right? Just not for talent management, but generally what you want to do. I did a lot of internships which were unpaid, right? And when we used to have our summer vacations for 2 months, I used to work to say, just to understand the business, right? And that's how talent came in as a concept. Uh, if someone's specifically looking at talent management, I would say, once you graduate, you know, assuming you're, doing something in commerce or in a business management kind of a field, you can always target some of the companies that you're looking at. Start with understanding the complete life cycle of how do you attract talent, how do you develop talent, and how from attract to retire. There are a lot of organizations, so I would say initially when you start up, you don't need a particular certification once you graduate, but as you move along in the journey, you should look at some certifications on talent, learning, and OD. So in any way, if you can crack into one of the HR functions, I think it's the right way to come close to talent management, to understand talent management, and then take it on from there.
Perfect. And of course, now every single function, every single business, and every single industry is talking about AI, is talking about automation. What areas of function or what areas of work do you think has that that implication of AI when we look at talent management as a function?
So what will happen is, over the next few years is, the roles are evolving and the skills are evolving in terms of the future of roles that are coming in. So of course the HR team will not be completely replaced, but AI will complement some of those roles which were very operational. So for example, if you look at talent acquisition, right, uh,
Yeah,
you will have people still hiring, but you may not have a person who will log in, go to the system, and take out
yeah,
CVs for you based on a certain skill, because that's already the resume passing can be done based on certain keywords through AI tools. So you just need a person who will, a talent acquisition team who will try and recruit the person based on the skills. The talent management teams are also developing certain kind of softwares to how do I really develop my talent. So there are certain apps that are coming in. How do I make learning, micro learning faster? So it could be a bite-sized 10 minute, 20-minute learning that the person can do while just scrolling, right? Rather than scrolling on Instagram, they could just probably scroll a particular lesson. So I think it'll become more accessible. It's changing the industry, but it'll it won't destroy it. So there are conversations around there'll be a lot of job losses, but no, it's just a kind of a reorientation that the industry is going through.
Interesting. Very interesting. You mentioned certain points around data. So nowadays companies have more data than ever. You put something on Excel sheet, you use certain functions, you bring in more data from the industry, from secondary sources, and then you can actually compare your trends with the market trend right there. So even though organizations have more access to data ever than before, why do so many still find themselves reacting to it rather than sort of preparing and working on it?
So, uh, as I said earlier as well, right? Organizations have data, but data automatically doesn't create insight or foresight, right? You have to, build that. So most organizations are measuring what happened yesterday than understanding what they need tomorrow. So that's why they are more reactive, because they're looking at a point in time measure, which is, let's say, 1 year back, or what has happened in the last 2 years, and then they're taking decisions to correlate, okay, what could happen in the future. So that's where the reaction part comes in. The real value, I think, comes from connecting that the workforce data to business strategy, to say, when can this reporting piece change to, rather than reporting, to planning, and from planning to basically forecasting. And that's where you go ahead and start looking forward to say, in the next 5 years, this is how my roles will evolve in the organization. So how do I reorient my people based on what will happen in the future?
Yes, very interesting way of looking at people, looking at the workforce. Also, Varun, a lot of times there are different signs that organizations have, a lot of points where they can pick it up and they can learn and they can start doing something. So, according to your experience and the organizations that you have seen, what are the earliest signs that an organization is operating reactively?
I think the most important part would be, or sign would be, having critical roles identified. So if an
Yeah.
organization does not have those critical roles identified, that means they don't have any successors for those roles, and that's the reason they are, reacting. That's one. Uh, s- because you don't have successors, the hiring becomes reactive. So that's the default solution to fill every capability gap. So you may have that capability sitting within the organization, but you're not open to seeing it. Then leadership teams also spend a lot of time discussing vacancies then, rather than capabilities. So that becomes reactive. And so I would say these three, so critical roles, hiring, and when leadership teams discuss a lot of vacancies that rather than capabilities, I think these are the signs where talent planning is lagging behind.
Yes, I would take this opportunity to share something that I recently graduated. I finished my master's, and then we were doing an event. It is a flagship event, but again, how much insight you'll put in. But because I do have background in HR, I was just thinking that what will happen once we are done with this event, and the points that you mentioned, that we have to think who will take up seat next year, who is capable of leading the team, who is capable of sort of mentoring people, we have to start looking at them since the beginning only, and sort of train them, mentor them in a way which in future can lead them to take up the seat. But if we don't do it, then for sure there is more cost attached, and then a lot of opportunity loss as well. So leaders and organizations have to invest their time and energy into it, and sort of have their plan prepared. We have been talking
Yeah,
about
exactly.
um, yes, yes. We have been talking about talent. We have been talking about how to make sure that we are keeping that talent intact and we are developing that talent throughout. But do you have any example, any insight for our listener, for our audience, as to how talent challenge that was sort of predictable, but company or a group of leadership panel, they could not identify an organization, like took it by surprise that now what do we do?
Well, if you look at large scale transformation or change management programs that organizations go through or undertake, I think that's a predictable
Yeah,
talent challenge because most of the times in your research you would see most of those change management efforts fail, right? So I've seen organizations announce ambitious digital transformation agendas while relying on traditional skill sets, right? And the
yeah,
capability gap was visible and it became more critical. So the surprise wasn't the shortage, but the surprise was basically how long it took the leaders to act on it. So it's a very simple concept, right? Think of you sitting on a chair, right? The You are the person, the chair is your job description, which you do today, right? So if in future your strategy is changing, your company's capabilities of looking at people, assessing people will also change. So the chair that you're sitting on, which is the job description, will also need to be reoriented. And if the chair
very
changes,
right.
right, and you're sitting on it, you're the person who will perform the role, you will also need to, upskill yourself in some way. So it's fairly simple, but yes, it becomes complicated when you're in a large organization.
Interesting. The analogy you've used is very easy to understand, but again, a lot of times people miss out on it. So great insight for our listeners. You also talked about workforce planning in earlier discussion. And what do you think, what does effective workforce planning actually involve, and what is it fundamentally when we say that we are planning our workforce? What does it actually imply?
So again, right, you'll hear a lot about workforce planning, and it could be disguised into multiple definitions of how companies take it. It is workforce planning, it could be strategic workforce planning, and other various aspects of how they call it. Most important part for you to understand is workforce planning is not about headcount, right? It's about answering certain questions to say where the business is going, right, in the future. So looking at a future lens, it's about looking at what capabilities will we need to get there, right? And as a result, how do we build, buy, borrow, and automate some of those capabilities if required, which is the talent. Headcount is simply one output you get, right? You may take a decision that we may increase or decrease our headcount over the next 3 to 5 years, but that's just an output. That's just a number, right? So, how do you create strategies around capability, building those capabilities is where people need to understand that workforce planning is just not about a certain number. How will it be a direct consequence to help me achieve my business strategies? So I'll give you a short example. So if the business plan or business strategy is to enter new markets
Yeah.
or adopt AI or expand your operations in a different country or a region or transform customer experiences, right? You can, of course, come up with a headcount number, but you will have to
Yeah.
completely transform your capabilities, your strategy of the organization, and your people. So I think that's something that people need to understand.
Yeah. And also the way you have replaced the last word when we were talking about people that we eventually have to automate. There is no replacement to it. You can have your people learn different skills, you can have your people do function differently. But yes, AI automation has entered the workforce, and there is sort of no way to uh, have blind sight towards it. Yes. And how do you think is how should business strategy and workforce strategy connect? Because the way you're trying to explain us different concepts has a very business perspective to it, because you're very seasoned into what you do. But at the same time, how do people actually connect this business strategy with workforce strategy and sort of make it work?
Well, you should very simply look at what comes first, right? As simple as that. So, if you're driving to a particular destination, you will, of course, sit in your car, start the car, and then start driving to the destination. So, workforce strategy is a direct consequence of the business strategy, right? So, your business strategy is the destination, this is what you want to achieve, right? The workforce strategy is basically you've started your car and you're driving towards it. So when you're driving towards it, you'll define some plans, right? You'll define this is how we need to do. We need to look at different markets. We need to look at different skills. We need to hire different people. So and then a certain people strategy will come out of it. So yes, so I think they should be treated as multiple parts contributing to a overall business strategy. So it's just they are completely related to each other, but they are a sub element of the overall business strategy. That's the overall operating model that the organization will define.
Okay. So in case if the leaders and the business partners who are listening to this podcast, if leader what are some questions that leadership should be asking about the workforce that they need in 3 to 5 years from now? Because business and people strategy are like subset of each other. Then what are the questions they should be asking for the future workforce?
Yes, so very simple now, and you should be hearing this all through with AI coming in as well. So you would see the
Yeah.
roles evolving, right? You'll see capabilities evolving. So simple questions, leadership teams should ask themselves is what are the new capabilities that will be created, in the next 5 years, right? What current capabilities do we have, and where do we need to upskill? So where are the development gaps that we have, right? Which skill might become obsolete, and if it does, how do we evolve from that, right? What are the roles that are hardest to replace? So it could be a skill issue, it could be a talent issue, it could be a demographic or a locational issue. But what are the roles that will become hard to replace? So you may want to have a strategy around those roles. Where are we most dependent on when it comes to few critical roles as well? And that's some of the questions where we start succession planning. And what leadership capabilities will the future growth require, right? So while you're a certain leader in the organization, you will still need to reinvent yourself as you go ahead in your career. So I think these certain questions are synonymous with every leadership team that they should ask themselves.
Interesting. Yes. Also, after, let's say, the identification of this entire need has been done. And now they really have to look at talent from the capability perspective. Um, then how do you identify capabilities that may become critical before the business fully realizes it? So they've identified a pool of talent, they've identified the need. Now, how do we identify these capabilities?
So, it starts with your mission and vision statement that your strategy has. Let's say you want to capture a larger market share in the next 5 years. Now, if you have to do that, you will be getting into new markets, you will be, let's say, increasing your production line, your reach, your distribution network. In that case, what you will look at is, think of it as a value price cost kind of a concept, right?
Yeah,
Where do you play in terms of value, price, and cost? Now, let me give you an example. If you're an Apple as an organization, you can debate it out. You could be playing on value, you could be playing on price, right? So, in a way, you're saying I'm giving a lot of value to the customers, but at the same time, I'm charging a lot of these are high-end phones, so you're charging a high price. That positions you
correct.
in a kind of a niche segment. You're not an everyday player, right? So your markets will
Yeah,
depend on what kind of markets you operate in, what kind of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 towns do you need to go there, or do you only play at tier 1 cities? And so this is just an example. Now it could also be cost. So for example, I
yeah,
produce at the lowest cost of production. So if you're doing that, then execution excellence, cost efficiency becomes your capabilities, because you have to continuously produce at the lowest cost. So I think
very important.
so yes, so these are some aspects you need to look at. Then of course you'll do your industry analysis, you look at what customer needs are, what are our priorities, but eventually you'll need to look at a value price cost framework to say where do you play, and then come up with capabilities, for example, customer
Yeah.
strategy or execution excellence, operational management, and so on.
So there's problems and there's opportunities both together. Does not only arise for companies, right? But we are also sort of trying to look at big businesses where owners might not have a full-fledged team of HR supporting or doing this business for them. So, what's the difference, do you think, is there between workforce planning that is driven by HR professionals like you and workforce planning that's sort of owned by business?
So I think that's where we get this wrong. Uh, Workforce planning initiatives fail if it is considered to be called as an HR activity, right? Because
Yeah,
it may be a HR driven activity, but I think it should be in partnership with the business, right? So if business leaders are not actively involved, the workforce planning will just become a forecasting activity, and that's where most of these efforts fail.
yeah,
So it's not about one particular function managing it. You have multiple stakeholders who partner in that process, and you question yourself to say how many people do you need. So you can't answer that in isolation, right? That's where the business needs to come in. So you need to ensure all your projects have a business sponsor and an HR sponsor together to eventually drive some of these initiatives to ensure that it succeeds rather than fails.
okay, okay. Again, very interesting way of looking at talent management. Um, also, let's just now sort of try to understand succession management as a concept. We have talked about it in our earlier discussion, but now let's just bring it in as a wider discussion topic. Um, So many organizations actually start thinking about successor after a key leader leaves. They start wondering that, okay, now we do not have a leader who will hold this position, who will sort of guide our people, who would make key decisions. Why does this happen so often? And is there any prevention metric? Is there any prevention thought action that leaders and HR business partners should keep in mind?
So, as I was talking to you about, about identifying critical roles, I think that's where succession planning effort becomes extremely important. Now, if the person leaves, I think we are only reacting to that situation and trying to fill in the role in the quickest possible time. And that's where we go wrong. What we do in our organization is we proactively, every year, we have a succession planning process. And we succession plan for those roles every year, regardless we know who's on the succession plan. Because
Yeah,
while the leader is already in that role, you could have an emergency situation suddenly and you need someone to fill in temporarily or permanently. You also need to look at the people who are on the leader's plan. Are they building themselves and are they getting closer to his or her readiness level, right? So, and these are some priorities that maybe some organizations are unable to do it, and that's why it becomes too late, and then they realize that the person is moving on,
yeah,
and we need to
correct.
fill in this position.
Yes. So, what does a good succession planning look like? If we were to claim that the process done by this company is right, how does it look like? Can you take us through that process?
So it has to be a continuous process, right? You have to
Okay.
do or update your succession plans sometimes even twice a year, right? Depending on the situation. Uh, if it's firstly, you need to identify what are those critical roles you need to succession plan for, right? Look at the current readiness levels to say, in this succession plan, do we have successors for this role or not, right? Even if they are, let's say, 20% ready, you place them on a certain succession category to say, okay, this person may take 3 to 4 years to develop into a ready now successor. So you need to assess the readiness levels, create certain development plans for that person to be ready in the next 3 to 4 years, which involves a regular review of talent, what kind of experiences you will provide him or her to ensure that he or she is ready. So it won't be a exercise on a spreadsheet. It'll be an implementation exercise over the next 3 to 4 years. So let's say if you have someone who's 3 to 4 years, it will take 3 to 4 years, and you follow up on his or her development, you will have that person ready within that frame of time. So I would say it's a continuous identification process that happens regularly, and it's not a once in a year kind of an activity.
Okay. And while doing this entire process, of course, there must be indicators which will help organization to identify this potential employee, this potential leader. At the same time, do you think that certain times leaders, organizations overestimate some employees on the basis of their recent experiences, their recent deliverables, while they sort of also overlook the others who could have been a better fit to that chair, to their leadership table? Do you think that is also something that happens in organizations quite often?
I think yes, the biggest capability gap that we have is firstly understanding who's our talent, right? That's the challenge every organization is going through, and at the same time measures to assess that talent. Because if you look at the performance management process, let's say someone has worked for in 2025 and his or her appraisal happens early in 2026 based on 2025 performance. this is a
Yeah.
point in time measure, right? You're looking at the past to, and then assigning a future bonus or a kind of a perk based on that. That's not how uh, current or proactive organizations should do this. We should look at future. So while past performance is an indicator, we need to look at future potential in terms of the person does not need to fit the role 100%, but if the person has the learning agility
Yeah.
or the curiosity to do this role, let's say even if he or she is 50-60% there, the remaining 40% can be developed. So I think we do not look at potential that much currently than what we should, and that is the reason we are unable to plan for talent.
Yes. And some way where we are looking at potential, a lot of times companies also look out. Though we do have internal mobility programs, we have referral programs where we sort of try to give priority to our internal talent. But certain times companies go out and they hire leadership from there, and then the challenges also differ. So, why do companies often search externally for talent that could be already available internally inside the company system, company pipeline, talent pool?
Well, it's a simple answer there. I think it's lack of visibility to internal talent. They organizations, if they do that, uh, they are unaware of what's currently sitting in their organization, right? So they have lack of visibility to some of those internal talent members, and that's why they go external. If you look at a possible build buy ratio, we look at a 70-30 kind of a framework where we would want an internal talent to be built for a certain role
Yeah.
rather than going out externally. The best organizations maintain that 70-30 ratio where 70% is internal and 30% is external. Now there could be a need of going in external if the skill is very scarce and you've done your research and you know that these skills are only available in the market and not internally. That is where you can go external. That's perfectly fine, but you should only do it until you've done the basic internal development research internally to say we don't have this skill, so that's why we're going out.
Yeah.
So I think it's just mostly overlooking in the internal talent, and the leaders do not have a view.
So that in that way we are speaking in terms of how leaders look at it. But if you were to sort of advise our audience, our listeners, who are on the other side of the table, who think that they have the potential, but somehow they're not getting chair at the table, what should they do to sort of make it very visible to the leaders that they're interested and they're ready to put in the work which is needed for that role?
I think it's more about visibility. So as an internal individual, I would encourage people within the organization to make yourself visible. Sometimes getting a new role is not about promotion or not about getting that salary hike, but it's about getting that experience and exposure to a certain role that you did not have. And if you put your hand up to say I'm willing to, let's say, do a stretched assignment or take up an internal mobility role at something different that's different from my current profile, I think that's something that you should put your hands up for. I would basically ask you to start using your skills, aspirations and capabilities in all your discussions that you're having with your managers, to look at potential opportunities that are coming out rather than searching for openings in the organization. So look at what kind of skill you can use in a role, and you know
Yeah.
go ahead and endorse yourself for it.
Yes, very impactful way to sort of put your work out there, put your skills and willingness out there. In that way, it's helpful for companies, organizations also to identify the potential that they have internally. Yes. Um, um, so Varun, if we talk about internal mobility again for one more time,
Mm-hmm.
what prevents this internal mobility becoming a true competitive advantage? Why do organizations sometimes might not prefer hiring talent internally and have somebody join organizations from outside?
I think it there's a certain level of bias also that comes in, to say that you have a certain internal talent, but maybe that person is is not good enough, for the role that you're advertising
Yeah,
for. And and again, it's a bias play to say you will assume the external person that you're interviewing to have that skill, which may not necessarily be true. So I would again call it bias and visibility, right? If you've identified those skills for the role, I think it there's there'll be a very rare chance that it's not available in your organization, right? There will be people.
yeah,
You just need to take a risk on some of those individuals to say yes, they can do the job. It's just will be a faster turnaround. You'll be able to develop them faster since they're internal. They know the ways of working. And sometimes, there are internal mobility programs that companies bring in, which most of the organizations do not, even do that. And you build a certain cohort which is internally mobile to take up certain critical roles that can, come up in the future. So we at HSBC do that. We have an international managers program where a
yeah,
select group is looked at, and they are at a very senior level. They know that every 2 years or 3 years they have to make their role redundant, which means every 2.5, 3 years they'll be doing a different role, and they have to find the role for themselves. So that's where I think internal mobility becomes an important factor, and the skills become a very important aspect as well.
interesting. Again, very interesting insight as to how it's done in action. Again, um, Varun, if you were given a chance to redesign internal mobility from scratch, let's say if you were to help a
Mhm.
company, if you were to help listeners and leaders of this podcast, what would you do differently in this redesigning?
I would basically look at mapping skills rather than looking at the roles. So yes, I would need to know what roles are available, what kind of skills do we have internally, and how can I design an internal mobility program on a skills pathway rather than a role pathway, because skills are still transferable but roles are not. So if I look at a person who's matching 60 to 70% of the skills in a particular role that I'm looking for, which is, let's say, based in a different country, I will consider him or her internally mobile for that role, right? Of course, there'll be certain upskilling. So, but of course, I'll design it based on skills. So, skills, aspirations, and how those capabilities proactively connect people with opportunities. That is what my internal mobility program will be based on.
Interesting. Again, very interesting answer. And if we were to sort of give some practical takeaways, some practical insights for leaders,
Mm-hmm.
um, what are three actions, or it could be more than three, but what are some list of actions that HR leaders can take let's say as soon as this quarter or as soon as this year, to become more proactive in their approach of managing talent at their companies?
So, it's very important, and I've discussed this before as well, to understand what are your critical roles in the business. So, you need to identify that. Review the succession readiness for each of those roles. So, that's one important factor that, the leader should take away. Uh, Conduct a capability gap assessment, right, linked to your business strategy to say, this is where my business is going and these are the capability gaps that we've looked at. So how do we fill it, right? And proactive skill-based hiring rather than a typical job description.
Okay, okay. And once this list is with them, once they have learned these actions, which talent metrics will deserve more attention from the leadership team? Is there any metrics that is your favorite? Is there any metrics that has worked for most of the teams that you have mentored, most of the organizations you have worked with?
So I was talking about the build buy ratio. So we look at the internal fill rates. So if the position is open, let's say a leader leaves the organization, if it's a critical role, we first fill it with the successor to check whether he or she is ready. So if it's a fulfillment that happens, it's a successful internal fulfillment. And there was no need to go out, so we've saved a lot of money. So we look at internal fill rates. We look at the leadership bench strength as well to say what kind of leaders do we have on this succession plan. Do we want to look at more gender diversity to get in more female leaders, right? So we keep some leaders, let's say, in conversation for some of our future roles, keep them interested. Our talent acquisition teams speak to some of the very senior leaders over a period of 6 to 8 months, keep them warm, knowing a role will come up very soon. And as soon as that comes, the person is there to replace them. So we have those conversations very early on, even when the person is in the role, right? So it is a very confidential discussion that takes place. And then, of course, the high potential retention. So there are some flags that we look at. What's the leadership bench strength? What is the flight risk? Based on that, we come up with some of the talent metrics that we come up with for our leaders. Yeah.
That also shows how change native a company is, whether they're ready to take things hands on or whether they sort of wait and react to it later.
Yeah.
But the approach which you suggested formally sounds a better in this market where we have hundreds of people offering very similar services. So sort of to thrive and preserve our talent, it's better for companies to be also very proactive in their approach. And of course, while we are doing this entire process, Varun, there must be some challenges, some risks that companies take. So, what talent risks should be reviewed regularly at the executive level? We did talk about staying ready. We did talk about having these conversations early on. But is there any particular way to sort of look at this risk or name these risks, and for leaders to stay prepared for it?
Yes, so as I said, flight risk is one. We try and through our conversations understand to see if the person is wanting to move out of the organization, and we get some early indicators as well. So flight risk is one. Is there a skill shortage that you're looking at based on, since let's say the leader's been in the role for a while, and the industry, the context of the role is changing, while the leader is not adapting to the role. So what are those critical skill shortages that we need to look at to upskill him or her? It's more again on build, buy, borrow. Then what's the diversity of our succession pipelines, right? We also look at internal versus external successors. So we try to identify internal successors, but we also ensure that, let's say for a market head role, we have a successor ready who's not in our bank but in some other bank, and having
Yeah.
early conversations with them beforehand. And the leadership pipeline health as well, to say it's not only about how should I say it? It's not only about gender diversity, but it's also in some regions diversity as a definition changes. So black
Hmm.
heritage in the US is a certain form of diversity. In India, Asia, it's more about gender. So I think we also look at some of those numbers which may not be applicable to India when it comes to black heritage, but it does apply to most of the US markets where we operate in.
Okay. Okay. Interesting way to look at it. Again, talent. For professionals who like sit on the other side of the table, what career mistakes do ambitious professionals make that sort of limit their long-term growth when we look at them from, again, talent perspective?
I would say early on in your career, when you switch jobs, it's fine. It's considered okay. But if you switch jobs fairly regularly, it that can be a red flag, right? So a little bit of consistency and longevity is required, right? There's no one step formula to let's say become a managing director in 10 years, right? You cannot put a certain timeline to it.
Yeah.
Maybe your peer is getting there, you are not getting there, but that does not mean that you're not doing well in your career. And generally people take some of those decisions based on peer pressure as well. It's again not an outright tenure based approach. It's more of a journey. So you need to take up multiple roles to eventually fill a certain seniorish role in the future. So I think sometimes people take those decisions based on designation or other factors, and not basis the quality and content that's there in the role. So I would advise them to look at the role holistically than just a few factors.
Okay. And while we look at this talent, while we look at professionals, what differentiates people who consistently advance from people who remain stuck? One we discussed is that you can't have a lot of job hops, but apart from it, is there any other signs that differentiate this two set of people from like each other?
I think if you're resilient and adaptable, I think you will be successful anywhere, right? Because that's the one extra factor that everyone is looking for, right? When ambiguous situation arrives, are you putting your hand up, and are you adapting to those ambiguous situations? That's one. Secondly, your ability to learning agility becomes very important, right? To upskill yourself over a period of time, you need to be willing to learn. Collaborate with your team members, because you cannot do it alone. Uh, Gone are those days where you will be spending 30 years in an organization and retiring in the same organization, but those days are gone.
Yeah.
So I would say a couple of these aspects are very important.
Okay. And while we talk about upskilling, can you also help our listeners and audience as to what capabilities, what skills will become most valuable over the next 5 years or 10 years down the line?
So, uh, resilience will always remain. Nothing can beat that. So that's something that should come internally. Uh, Learning agility also is a part of it. I would say continuous improvement or uh, need to learn kind of an attitude is very important. So you need to be agile, uh, be adaptable, be able to collaborate with people. At the same time, with these new skills of AI coming in, you don't need to be an expert on AI, but you should need to know how will AI affect your role and how can you complement it in your role rather than get worried of what changes might come in. And of course, while you're working at it, strategic thinking
Okay.
and having a helicopter view of the business is also very important.
Okay. Okay. You must have experienced different thing in your career. You must have had your own life turns, your own career turns, and now you're able to give this wonderful insights from your own journey. But if our listeners, if our audience were to understand that what's one lesson from your own career that took much longer to learn than it should have, what is it? And you think that could be one of the lessons that other people will learn? And is there a toolkit for them to sort of prevent it and come out of it?
I would say hard work is good, right? It is required, but that does not guarantee success. That's what I have learned. While you work hard, you also need to acknowledge that you need to partner with people along the way to make you look good, and that's why teams are there. So, working in teams, in projects or situations is something that you need to be very open to. Focus on your strength and not compare yourself with someone else, because you are two different people with two different journeys. So the path will not be the same at all, right? And just continue to upskill yourself, keep reading. I think that's a basic aspect that uh, people should be well informed of what is happening in the industry. If some of these aspects are taken care of, I think you'll be very comfortable in your job.
Awesome. Yes. In the same segment, so we have a very fun rapid fire plan, because we think that it is also important to sort of get your candid opinions as to what you truly support in talent. So I have a uh, list of rapid fire questions with me. These are just one word uh, words, wherein I'll give you two options and you sort of have to tell me which one you believe has more impact or which one you believe has more weightage to it, keeping in mind the overall theme of our today's episode. So let's sort of begin. We'll just do this in a one go and then sort of wait and discuss, and sort of have our insight as to what we think about those answers. Um, so Varun, my first
Sounds
rapid
good.
fire for you is: do you believe more in potential or in experience?
Potential.
One most overrated hiring metric.
Years of experience.
Interesting. Most underrated leadership trait.
Self-awareness.
Very interesting. One capability every future HR leader must master.
Business acumen. You need to know your industry.
Internal talent or external talent?
Internal.
one thing AI will fundamentally change about talent strategy?
How organizations will identify, deploy, and develop skills.
Okay, okay. One book every people leader should read.
The inner game of stress.
Wow, that's an interesting one. One piece of advice for first-time managers.
So it's not about you, it's about what your team does. So make them look good, you will eventually look better. So yeah.
Wow, wow. I think I should have had more rapid fire questions for you because your answers are really something I would like to go back to and sort of rethink on it. But my favorite would be indeed from this entire list would be about most overrated hiring metric because we end up putting years of experience on top and sometimes that does not justify that person or the potential that we're looking for. So wonderful answers again. I'm pretty sure that audience will have the same reaction as I'm having. I do have a set of sort of like final question for this episode because we're almost winding up the discussion for today's episode. So if every HR leader listening today remembers one thing from this conversation, absolutely, that's not justifiable because there is a lot to take note of from what you shared. But if there is one thing from this conversation that they should take home, what should it be according to you, Varun?
Stop treating talent as a regular HR process. That's one.
Yeah,
Treat it as a business capability.
okay, okay. Um, so I think the discussion we started was we began with a very brief idea of what is happening, and then we sort of moved towards your experiences, moved towards what is happening at global level, and also we sort of tried preparing a toolkit to multiple situations. So it was a very insightful discussion. Um, and as we are sort of closing today, I would like to mention that the strongest organizations aren't the ones that hire fastest, but they're the ones that see talent needs before they become talent problems. Because workforce planning is no more just about predicting the very perfect future, but it's about preparing for it's better than everyone else doing in the industry. So, Varun, thank you so much for joining us in Hiring Room, which is the podcast by the Scatalyst. We're very thankful. Thank you for giving your time. Thank you for giving your insights. And we're very confident and sure that this podcast will bring in a lot of insights, a lot of lessons for professional, for leaders, and for organizations looking at talent management and sort of understanding to do it better than everybody else in the market. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Nandini and team, for having me.